Well, the genre of analog horror as we knew it is effectively dead, and Skinamarink killed it. Not that I didn't try and put in as much effort as possible to save the genre from imminent destruction with my own series, The Hypnagogic Archive, in which I attempted to set up a kind of golden standard other series could follow if they wanted to create effective, memorable, long-lasting, deeply resonant interactive horror on the internet. However, what I couldn't possibly have accounted for was that in 2022, Canadian director Kyle Edward Ball would come out of the shadows and release Skinamarink, one of the most deeply embarrassing pieces of horror ever released in cinematic form. Skinamarink is not only terrible, like the Mandela Catalog or the Walton Files, with piss-poor production, awful acting, barely any plot, zero narrative cohesion. But to add insult to injury, you can only watch Skinamarink on Shudder, everyone's favorite low-quality horror streaming service. This, in effect, ruins the entire idea of analog horror, which was, at its core, a grassroots movement of small-scale, independent, extremely small filmmakers to kind of get a footing in the industry, get a taste of what lay ahead for them if they chose to pursue a career in directing. But analog horror in and of itself was never meant to be consumed in a cinematic form, much less on some bloated streaming service that doesn't even give proper outlets to real movies. Like, for instance, if Skinamarink was given a theatrical release, I might at the very least respect it as an independent film which was able to be released in certain theaters in certain cities, maybe given a limited release, not a full nationwide release, but at the very least I might respect it as a kind of freak accident. But no, Skinamarink is behind an $8 a month paywall on Shudder. This, in effect, kills internet horror. It means that nobody is going to take internet horror seriously anymore, because at this point, we're charging $8 a month for people to watch someone's kindergarten project, which isn't meant to carry all that much weight. I think even the really good web series, like Local 58, which all things considered are pretty good, aren't worth paying $8 a month for. And maybe we should draw a line between Local 58 and The Shining, because one is $1 million movie that's worth paying $8 to watch, and Local 58 is a low-budget, independently run web series that's ultimately just Chris Straub's passion project and really isn't worth paying $8 a month to watch, unless you really want to. Chris Straub does accept donations for Local 58, and I wouldn't personally pay that because episodes of Local 58 come out so sporadically and unpredictably that it's not really worth paying for. But at the very least, you do just have the option to watch Local 58 for free, which I think is a very important aspect of why Local 58 is a worthwhile thing to watch, because there's no fucking gatekeeping, and nobody is pretending like it's higher or mightier than it is. Skinamarink is not worth $8 a month. In fact, I would argue that if it was posted for free on YouTube in its entire 2-hour excess, it would not be worth watching. Skinamarink is all the cliches and worst bits of analog horror, all the horrible tropes, all the lackluster cinematography, all the general apathy that seems to typify the genre these days, boiled down into 2 hours of a fucking snooze fest. Skinamarink, to put it simply, pretends as if it's some kind of trans-dimensional terror fever dream about nostalgia and childhood and being spooked by monsters under the bed. But it's none of that. It's 2 straight hours of static shots with barely any audio, incoherent hipster dialogue, shit lighting. The entire thing looks grainy as fuck. And I understand that, of course, director Kyle Edward Ball is trying to make it look like old film grain, old discovered footage, but it really just makes it painful to look at. And it's stretched out to 2 fucking hours. Like, I don't like the Mandela Catalog or the Walton Files, but at the very least, one thing I can give them credit for is that they're fucking short, and they're over fast, and you can just watch an episode of Walton Files in like 6 minutes and then be done with it. They don't stretch themselves out to 2 hours because that would be patently insane. That's another element in which Skinamarink completely breaks the necessary components of what makes analog horror effective. The fact that analog horror in its ideal form should be kind of short. It shouldn't be 2 hours long and waste that much of your time, because at the end of the day, what you're supposedly watching is some lost VHS fragment or some abandoned film reel. And in all honesty, most of the stuff you'd find on an abandoned VHS tape or film reel wouldn't be 2 fucking hours of a complete movie that's extremely well edited and lit and has obvious studio interference and oversight. That's not the type of shit you'd find on an abandoned VHS tape. We've effectively strayed so far from the ethos of what analog horror aims to be that we're not even in the same territory we started at. So the term analog horror has effectively lost all its meaning. There is no definition for it anymore. It's fucked. Skinamarink is not only embarrassing because it's a bad movie where all the characters talk with the dialect of 2022, even though it's ostensibly set in the 1970s or 1980s or whatever. I forget the exact year, but that's largely relevant to my point. The point being that Skinamarink is meant to be set in the past, but all the characters, what little there are of them, of course, talk like it's 2022 and they're modern day hipsters, because for whatever reason, people in the present can't seem to accept that certain terms and slang and vernacular and just the general vocabulary and intonation of people in the past was remarkably different. It's a little thing, it's a little touch that not many people take into account when they make a period piece like Skinamarink, but really, not talking like a hipster from 2022 can go a long way towards people believing that you're actually in 1983 or whatever.
I've been incredibly busy with my upcoming feature film, Skinamarink.
Not only is Skinamarink a horrible movie, its entire business model from start to finish, whereby it was hosted on Kickstarter and raised its budget via a bunch of strangers on the internet donating to it. This entire business model is one that I deeply despise and have been wanting to talk about at length for some time, because I think the way that we fund art these days speaks a lot to our broken economy. See, this is the way that I produce art, and I think this is the way that any self-respecting artist should produce art. If you want to make something artistically fulfilling, if you want to make a movie or a comic or a painting or whatever the fuck, then you make that thing first, and then you sell it as a finished product to people who want to buy it. But you don't force them to pay you to make it. That's not how it should work. You shouldn't force people to pay you to make them a sandwich even if they don't know how good the sandwich is going to be. You should make sandwiches ahead of time, wrap them up in saran wrap, show them off to your customers, and then have them pay for the sandwiches individually. I think this is the easiest and simplest and most direct method of consumption and results in a superior product, because the product was made not out of monetary or budgetary or financial constraint, but out of legitimate passion. What a lot of people don't seem to understand is that we live in an age of such mass commodification that it's not expensive at all to create art in today's day and age. I film these videos on my digital camera, which I've had for 5 years, have absolutely gotten my money's worth out of at this point, and cost about $500, I believe, initially. But, like I said, it's lasted for 5 years, and it shoots just like a professional camera. A camera is all you need to make a decent video or movie, aside from props, which you can just find lying around your house. I found these clothes and this tie and this shirt just fucking around, and I was like, I'll toss these on and make a video because they look cool together. And it didn't cost me jack shit. The same goes for comics. Comics, especially, out of every form of art, out of every medium, are effectively cost neutral. They cost virtually nothing to produce. All you need is paper and pins. Paper costs what? $10 for 500 sheets, and pins cost like $10 a pack? That's $20 altogether, and you can make a comic that's absolutely fucking phenomenal, just depending on how good your hand-eye coordination is and how many ideas you have rumbling up in your noggin. But at the end of the day, I would never start a fraudulent Kickstarter campaign where I convince a bunch of gullible internet morons to donate $100,000 to me and convince them that my comic would actually cost that much to produce. Because if I said that, I'd be fucking lying, because no comic costs that much to produce. We live in an age of hyper-consumerism and capitalism to the extent that it is not at all difficult to get supplies to make whatever creative endeavor you want. So when you get right down to it, the fact that Skinamarink, a movie composed of 2 hours of mostly static shots of hallways and ceilings and shit, with barely any humans shown on screen for the entire runtime. When you consider that Skinamarink was filmed on a budget of supposedly $10,000 that Kyle Edward Ball needed to raise on Kickstarter, it starts to kick in sort of just how much of an absolute scam dumpster fire this entire Kickstarter economy is. I remember reading a book called Move Fast and Break Things. I don't recall if that was the actual title, but it was something like that. And it was essentially about how Silicon Valley will just go at absolutely anything with zero regard for the consequences because they're focused on innovation above all else. The author of this book wasn't exactly writing in the current landscape we find ourselves in. He was writing more so in the early 2000s, if I recall correctly, and that was sort of before Google established market dominance. But at the very same time, he did outline sort of the intricacies of what I prefer to call, for lack of a better term, the Kickstarter economy. Because this guy knew a band called The Band, a generic name I know, and what effectively happened was the band had a pretty successful run of albums in the 70s, if I recall, and then this guy was approached by the creator of one of these online grifting, kickstarting, fundraising websites like GoFundMe or Kickstarter or whatever, and he was like, hey, let's get the band back together and you can start a Kickstarter and make this stupid fucking reunion album with zero legitimacy or authenticity or care put into it, but you can offer a bunch of tiers and a big bargain pack for your biggest supporters. And the author of Move Fast and Break Things, and this is a total badass move, he referred to Kickstarter as a virtual begging bowl, which is really all it is at the end of the day. It's just where artists can go to beg for scraps rather than actually living up to their creative potential and creating something worthwhile that people will appreciate. As I said, the Kickstarter method is completely fucking backwards. You shouldn't pay up front for a product that may or may not hypothetically exist in the future. You should create a product first, a tangible object that people can see, and then sell it to people individually, so that rather than having to pay for a $25 Kickstarter tier, they can just pay $10 for the thing itself and then go on their merry way instead of being bound by a Patreon obligation. Because I don't believe in a Patreon model where I'm forced to shit something out on a monthly basis to satisfy my legions of online fans who, in all honesty, don't really give a shit about what I produce. I think Patreon is perverse as fuck to the artistic process, and I'd never in a million years even remotely consider making one. Because at the end of the day, all I want to do is offer raw material products to consumers. I think that's how an economy functions best. I don't think it's good for people to dump a whole shit ton of money into a robot on Kickstarter or whatever, and then the creator of the Kickstarter just delivers a really low quality shit product that was nothing like the original pitch, but given Kickstarter's terrible terms of service, they just kind of have to accept it and go, oh dang, well you delivered on something even if it wasn't exactly what you claimed it was going to be.
What is this?
It's a Juicero.
Kickstarter is a great way to get fucking scammed out of your money, and Skinamarink is great proof of that, because there's no fucking way Skinamarink cost $10,000 fucking dollars to make. I made a web series called The Door a couple years back, and it was literally just shots of the hallway here and my front door, and it cost $0 to make. And guess what? I didn't ask for $10,000 for it on Kickstarter. I didn't ask for jack shit. I just posted it onto the internet because that's my passion and that's where my ambitions lie as an amateur filmmaker. I want to create magic with my camera, and creating magic doesn't cost shit. I just need my camera and something to point my fucking camera at. It doesn't cost anything. We're not in the age anymore where you have to pay for physical film stock. You have to actually pay for reels. You have to actually pay for raw material. You can just take your digital camera. I mean, fuck, everyone's got an iPhone these days. You can just take your fucking iPhone, press record, and go to town with that sucker. Now, true, if you do actually want to release your movie on legitimate film stock or VHS tape, as I'm prone to do, then that'll cost a little bit. But even so, I don't demand that people pay me on Kickstarter so I can buy VHS tapes. I buy the VHS tapes with my own fucking money, some of which, truth be told, is from comics I've sold or raw products I've sold, but I reinvest everything I make when I sell a comic or a VHS tape into buying more raw materials, more paper, more pins, more VHS tapes. This is a self-sufficient cycle. This is sustainable. It's not the parasitic Kickstarter model where you demand that people pay you for something that may not even exist. Now, I think it's somewhat important here to clarify that I have absolutely nothing against small, independent filmmakers scrounging up a budget from the odds and ends if they legitimately do have a compelling story to tell. Director Darren Aronofsky's debut film, Pi, for instance, from 1998, was produced on a budget of around $100,000. $60,000 if you don't count the insurance, according to the Wikipedia article. The difference between Pi and Skinamarink, though, is that Pi has a plot, recognizable characters, shit goes on, shit goes down. It doesn't look particularly expensive, but on the other hand, it doesn't look particularly cheap. It has stunning filmography, a really cool protagonist, and an extremely novel premise that I haven't seen done anywhere else. And in addition, Pi was created before this parasitic internet model was in place. So Darren Aronofsky and his crew legitimately had to raise these funds through like an art foundation and ask their personal friends and family for $100, and they had to be like, look, you know, this film will really be great. It'll really be good. Please give us $100. But I respect that. I respect the grind and hustle of having to ask people for $100 in person, rather than just having a bunch of morons across the internet just funnel you a bunch of money and then you make complete crap. People probably knew Darren Aronofsky, and they probably knew, oh, yes, Darren Aronofsky is going to make something great. And Darren Aronofsky did, but that's because Darren Aronofsky isn't this Canadian hipster, Kyle Edward Ball. Darren Aronofsky is a real director who makes real movies that even today are given theatrical, large-scale releases, his most recent being The Whale with Brendan Fraser, which, all things considered, was pretty good. Not as good as Pi, though. Pi's a fucking masterpiece, and more people should watch it for an example of an effective, independent, small-scale film that was produced, all things considered, on a micro-budget, similar to what Skinamarink got, but the difference is Skinamarink looks, sounds, and feels like shit. It's not just that Skinamarink is boring. I've watched movies with long, plodding, slow shots. I've watched Stalker. I watched all of Stalker. It's 2 hours of people walking around in fields and going through rooms with puddles in them. But at the very least, there's people, there's characters, there's like a set, and they walk through this set, and it's kind of something. And on the other hand, that was made in Soviet Russia, so they didn't have fucking Kickstarter up there. You just went to the government to make your movie, and the government would be like, yeah, we'll fund this shit, and that was hardcore and badass back in Soviet times. Clearly Kyle Edward Ball does not function under that system. You wouldn't see something like Stalker come out of the Canadian hipster ecosystem. Right off the bat, Kickstarter completely ruins your immersion by listing all the fucking Kickstarter backers right at the beginning during the opening credits when the film is attempting, one would suppose, to build a kind of atmosphere of tension and that this is the past, but, you know, Kickstarter didn't fucking exist in 1975 or whenever Skinamarink is set, so the fact that there are a big list of Kickstarter supporters right at the front completely fucking ruins the movie.
I cannot guarantee that you are going to love this film. What I can guarantee is this. When the film is over and you go home, go to bed, and turn off the lights, I guarantee you are going to have a difficult time falling asleep.
Like, imagine if a really great opening credits sequence, like the one from The Shining, which is specifically engineered by Stanley Kubrick to be extremely minimalist and only show you exactly what needs to be shown, like writer, director, stars. There's no fluff to it, and it's designed to create a feeling of dread. Here's what The Shining credits would look like if they had to credit every fucking random backer on Kickstarter for whatever reason. Let's say there's an alternate timeline where Stanley Kubrick wasn't a respected enough director to just get direct studio funding, so he had to turn to all the morons on Kickstarter. Here's what that would look like. Wow, it doesn't exactly carry the same amount of punch and gravitas, now does it? What I find particularly insulting is that people online have told me that I'm in a similar scenario to Kyle Edward Ball, that my status as the creator of the Hypnagogic Archive, one of the best analog horror series ever made, is in any way comparable to that of the creator of Skinamarink. Rest assured, we're not in the same position or boat in any way, shape, or form. Like, for one, I'm not fucking Canadian, so right off the bat there are some pretty big differences between the way I would approach a creative project and the way Mr. Ball would. Heck, Mr. Ball probably doesn't even need to get funding on Kickstarter. He could just go to the Canadian government and they'll subsidize it for him. Hasn't this guy ever heard of the National Film Board of Canada? They make pretty good shit. They could probably fund his project, and it might even be better than if it was funded by a bunch of random morons on Kickstarter who all get their names in the credits and get the title of producer. But there are a lot of other ways in which I differ from Mr. Ball. Chief among them being that I produce quality products that are actually good, which aren't as likely to catch on as much as this gimmicky Skinamarink bullshit that's airing on Shudder for $8 a month. I post all my shit free onto YouTube. I'm not morally bankrupt enough to start up a Kickstarter and swindle my followers out of $10,000 for no fucking reason. Even if Shudder did contact me directly and they were like, "Hey Nick, the Hypnagogic Archive's a really great project, we'd love to fund a Hypnagogic Archive movie," I'd tell them to go shove it, because the Hypnagogic Archive, as an analog horror series, is designed to be consumed in small little bites, piecemeal, that are hidden throughout the internet as a kind of viral puzzle, and it's not meant to be a fucking movie or commodified like that. It's just not going to happen. I created the Hypnagogic Archive not because analog horror was trendy at the point I made it. Typically, I don't latch on to trends. I don't really believe in trends. I prefer for my work to be timeless. I created the Hypnagogic Archive because, unlike Kyle Edward Ball, who uses this sort of thing for gimmicky nostalgia purposes, I legitimately do have faith in the magic and power of VHS and what it can offer and bring to the table for consumers if they open their mind to it. I don't just create an old-looking movie with film grain effects tossed in there. I actually release my videos on real VHS tape that people can actually watch if they give a shit about VHS as a home video recording format. I may never get as popular as Skinamarink. In fact, I'm pretty confident in saying that I won't. But that doesn't fucking matter to me, because what matters to me is creating a product that is enjoyable and fun and narratively brilliant to think about and look at and enjoy. Kyle Edward Ball and I are really about as far apart as artists as I think it's possible to get. Kyle Edward Ball is an opportunist who will sell out the minute he gets an offer from a big streaming service like Shudder, whereas I, even though I'm one of the most influential figures in the history of the internet, probably, even if people don't cognizantly recognize that all the time, I would never get an offer like that from a big-time streaming service, because my work is actually good, so it's not as marketable to a wide, huge crowd, and it won't exactly draw everyone in for $8 a month, the recurring subscription fee, which is the worst possible fucking way to consume media if you really think about it, having to pay $8 a month forever and ever and ever. Come and play with us, Danny. No, I didn't create the Hypnagogic Archive to latch on to the analog horror trend, because as far as I'm concerned, stories about spooky VHSs started a damn long time before Local 58, and they'll easily outlive Skinamarink. But analog horror, as we know it, in its current incarnation, as a cheesy load of fucking bullshit, like the Mandela Catalog or the Walton Files, that might be dead for now, and honestly, I think that's for the best overall.
Come here. Look. Oh my god. Yeah. Brain's not supposed to do that.
Nobody needs this crap. They should watch really good shit, like David Cronenberg's film Videodrome, which did everything something like Local 58 did, but like 30 fucking years ago, and is a damn good movie, and definitely wasn't funded on fucking Kickstarter. I've heard from a lot of people who just latch on to trends, people who exist at all times in the immediate present, and assume that whatever's trendy at the moment is what needs to be hopped on for as much monetary gain as possible. This year it's Poppy's Playtime, the next year it'll be FNAF 7, the year after that, it'll be Hello Neighbor 3. Wowee, isn't this exciting? Now it's Five Nights at Freddy's, but the new one. Isn't this spooky? People seem to have a terrible memory and a terrible grasp on time, and I pointed this out in my video about the Walton Files, that something about my generation in particular, Generation Z, young people, it's bizarre, because we can't seem to accurately capture what the past was like in any meaningful capacity. Skinamarink is one of the most piss-poor depictions of the 70s or 80s or whenever the fuck it's supposed to be. It's nothing like what you would see from those times. And it's very weird that we don't seem to have a handle on history or what preceded us, considering that we, young people, have access to more information and more knowledge and more material than anyone before us. We can instantly, at the touch of a button, watch any movie from any time period, read any text, anything. The world is open to us, but we remain extremely self-absorbed in the immediate present, just assuming that whatever's popular, whatever's hip at the moment, is what's going to last forever. But that's a fucking illusion. That's an extremely limited mindset. I'm not going to stop making analog horror. I mean, I might stop making analog horror, but I'll always be making VHS horror, because VHS transcends time. But I'll never stop making horror about VHS. I have heard a lot of people say that analog horror is out and digital horror is in. Digital horror is a genre of horror that, unlike analog horror, isn't even remotely scary because it's based around Minecraft and Roblox. And nothing is fucking scary about Minecraft and Roblox. And if you think it is, you're just fucking delusional. Roblox is a game for toddlers. There's nothing scary about that. It's not a snuff film. It's not on VHS. Shut the fuck up. Digital horror is going to last maybe like 3 years in popularity. Nobody gives a shit about your spooky Minecraft, Roblox, Steve at 3 a.m., oh my gosh, gone wrong type story. That web series is not going to last for very long. I legitimately heard from someone a couple months back who told me that Agamemnon Counterpart is not worth caring about anymore because it's old and people have forgotten about it and you don't hear about it so often anymore. And I think that's a real shame because I think Agamemnon Counterpart is one of the most authentic, self-expressive, important videos ever uploaded onto the internet. I watch Agamemnon Counterpart and I'm reminded of what internet horror should be. It should just be a random, weird, funny little short video that you upload onto the internet purely out of passion for the craft of filmmaking. Agamemnon Counterpart didn't get a fucking Kickstarter behind it because that fucking ruins the mystery. Agamemnon Counterpart was uploaded out of a passion for the craft, and it gave a shit. And now, a bunch of young people these days are like, well, that was in 2006. And 2006 was 100 years ago, so it's not important anymore. Fuck Agamemnon Counterpart. I'm going to watch my Five Nights at Freddy's 7 gameplay. And this is just a really short-sighted, limited, piss-poor view to take. It's thoroughly stupid. You see, the reason that I care so much about accuracy in period pieces, the reason I'm so much of a fucking history buff, is because I recognize that if we're supposed to understand our own place in the present, we need to understand the past. We need to maintain temporal perspective and understand that there were things which came before us that aren't now, that don't exist anymore, but did exist at one point. We need to remain cognizant of how time works as a construct. Because if you don't do that, if you get too caught up in the immediate present and you assume that how things are right now is going to last forever, it's only going to hit harder when things stop being the way they are and you're 50 and you have a bunch of kids in debt and Five Nights at Freddy's isn't popular anymore. You're going to be like, shit, where'd Five Nights at Freddy's go? On the other hand, if you maintain a kind of temporal respect for everything that preceded you and everything that came after, and recognize yourself as a mere player in a long, long, continuous process of constant cause and effect, then it won't matter that Five Nights at Freddy's isn't trendy anymore, because you can always enjoy it. This is what separates, I think, the extremely dated, lame creepypastas like Squidward's Suicide from the extremely hard-hitting, badass good ones like Ted the Caver, which is, I think, one of the best pieces of internet literature ever published and really does hold up today and is worth reading for anyone interested in creating captivating internet literature. A lot of people deride me as having old-fashioned standards, but that's because when I was young, I wasn't reading the extremely dated crap series that were targeted at my age range, like The Hunger Games or Captain Underpants. I was busy reading books like The Wonderful Voyage to the Mushroom Planet by Eleanor Cameron, Homer Price by Robert McCloskey, The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, The 21 Balloons by William Pinet Dubois, and above all else, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And I never once thought when I was reading these books, dang, the people in these books aren't acting like the present day. This is weird. The past is weird and scary and I don't understand it. This is dated and old and yucky for me because I'm a young person and I want to read Diary of a Wimpy Kid. That's not how I interacted with this sort of literature at all. Rather, I just accepted that it was a product of the past, of old-fashioned times, that it wasn't really relevant in depicting current contemporary American society, but that it didn't need to. Because at the end of the day, reading Homer Price is interesting. It's an interesting look into a world and period that no longer exists. And I think anyone should. I think reading Homer Price when you're a kid is way better for your mental development than reading some shit like Diary of a Wimpy Kid at the end of the day. Some people might call me a bit of a contrarian for holding such high standards and expecting better from literature, especially the type of literature that's, supposed to cultivate the next generation of great thinkers. As of late, there's a concerted effort to try and stop Roald Dahl books from being read because supposedly it was an anti-Semite or whatever. And all I really have to say to that is, yes, in all likelihood, Roald Dahl books are fucking outdated. They were written in the 1950s. Do I think they need to be read? No, not necessarily. There are much better books that you could be reading, a lot of them in fact, but at the same time, some things just aren't timeless. Charlie and the Choco Factory was never going to be a timeless book that is relevant forever. It depicts an extremely specific, dated worldview, an extremely specific point in time that just no longer exists. There aren't big chocolate factories and candy magnates anymore. That's just not a thing. Roald Dahl fought in fucking World War II. Do you think his experience as a World War II British man is going to be relevant to anyone in 2023? No, probably not. But you can still read the books to your kids and be like, this is how things used to be, this was the old days, and I think that's alright. When you get right down to it, the decay of memory and the collapse of time and the inability of people to understand the past in a meaningful way is nothing new. It's been going on since ancient Greece. Everyone has always been hating the young generation. The old generation always hates the young generation for being too uppity and presumptuous and ambitious. And the young generation always hates the old generation for being too fucking old-fashioned and not with the times and old and dodgy and stodgy. And it's an annoying cycle to see repeating over and over and over again. But ultimately, it's just a part of life that we're never going to be able to avoid. I mean, I can avoid it. I can show both respect for my elders and respect for my youngers, but I guess some people are just sort of incapable of that. Back in the 1960s, you saw the generation gap. Hippies versus the old folks, the ones who went to war in World War I and World War II, and wanted to see the young people going to war in Vietnam. Now we hate the old people who are 50 and 60 and 70 and grew up in the Vietnam area, and we Gen Zers laugh in their faces and go, you don't know how to use the internet, Grandpa, you fucking loser. This is nothing new, and it's just going to keep going on and on until the end of time. Humanity is always going to have a disrespect for its future and for its past. Young people hate old people hate young people, and this is what prevents humanity from achieving any kind of further step. I think ultimately this could be humanity's downfall, but I'm not one to give into narratives about either humanity's glorious ascent to godhood or a downfall into sheer chaos. I think the most likely outcome in the future is that humanity will just keep existing here on this same old rock as it always has. We're not going to go up into space, but it's not going to be the apocalypse either. We're just going to kind of keep being here just forever, and we're just going to keep arguing with each other over whether Five Nights at Freddy's 5 or 3 is the better one, because I grew up with Five Nights at Freddy's 3, but then Five Nights at Freddy's 7 is actually better because it's newer and you're fucking old.
I love you alphabet, wherever I go, you're ABC delicious, oh I love you so.
Hey, old-timer!
Yeah?
What's big, ugly, and East Coast alphabet?
Don't know. A big, ugly alphabet eater.
Two of the most important characters in literature, respectively, are Billy Pilgrim from Kurt Vonnegut's book Slaughterhouse-Five and Paul Atreides from Frank Herbert's Dune. These characters have a lot in common. Billy Pilgrim becomes unstuck in time following his encounter with the Tralfamadorians, and Paul Atreides, likewise, is cognizant of every possible path, every possible contingency in the future because he's the Lisan al-Gaib. I don't want to be a short-sighted moron who makes dated content and hops onto trends like Kyle Edward Ball obviously did, with no real passion or interest in creating art that uplifts people and gives people new perspectives and new insight. I don't want to create a product as ass and forgettable and immediately dated as Skinamarink is. In 5 years, nobody is going to remember Skinamarink. If you focus on the immediate present, if you focus exclusively on self-gratification and the accumulation of wealth and just funding your bullshit Kickstarter so you can make some shit to hop on a trend without any real investment in the craft, that's some Baron Harkonnen shit. That's some Beast Raban shit. That's some Fade Routha bullshit right there. That's Harkonnen behavior. I want to be Paul fucking Atreides. I want to smell that spice so long and so fucking hard that I get some fucking melange fever and I am able to see way into the future. I'm able to predict future trends and guide the world to my own design. I want to become the fucking Kwisatz Haderach in Ascend to deification by the Fremen. That's my game plan, man. Dune is hands down one of the best books I've ever fucking read. I've been reading it over the past year. And it's great proof that, unlike Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, not every book will become dated. Dune is still going to be relevant and read and appreciated 200, 300, 500 years from now. It's always going to be a relevant book because it's set so fucking far in the future, but by the time Dune is set, humanity will probably be extinct, so there won't be anyone around to read it and correct Frank Herbert about how wrong he was. Dune is the kind of book with such prescience and such insight into the human condition that it effectively transcends time, and I feel pretty confident in calling it timeless. Skinamarink is not going to be timeless because it takes advantage exclusively of nostalgia, which is something that I personally don't think I'm capable of feeling. I have a connection to the past. I have a deep-seated appreciation for the past and the potential that it offers to the present and the future, but I don't think I'm capable of nostalgia because I wasn't born in the Pokemon generation. I mean, I was, but I didn't fucking play Pokemon. I didn't read Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and my role model is Elzie Chrysler Seeger, who died in the 1930s, and nobody today knows who he is. I remember being told when I first got onto the internet and posted some of my comics that I should use John Kricfalusi, the pedophile creator of Ren and Stimpy, as a role model. Yes, people actually made that suggestion. Or Butch Hartman, the hyper-religious fanatic who created The Fairly Odd Parents, which is an absolute shit show in every conceivable way. My role model is Elzie Chrysler Seeger, but you don't know who Elzie Chrysler Seeger is. You're not fucking cultured enough to know who George W. Giesel is, or who Rough House is. You don't know who Castor Oil is. Stop bullshitting with me, you plebeian. That's my role model. That's who I take inspiration from, but because I take inspiration from such eclectic and wide-ranging sources, people find it difficult to connect with me in any meaningful capacity or understand what I'm trying to say. And that can be pretty fucking difficult, because I'm Billy Pilgrim, and I can see absolutely every year and every outcome, and my brain is fucking exploding. Damn you Tralfamadorians, you sure have an interesting way of looking at everything. When it gets right down to it, you probably don't give that much about Skinamarink or Willy Wonka or any of this shit. You're just laughing there in your little green plunger bodies as we humans are hurtled cataclysmically through the universe, eh? Anyway, all this is to say, I guess, that when you get right down to it, all the hype over Skinamarink being the horror that movie theaters aren't ready for, even though it's actually just the horror that's so fucking overhyped and boring that movie theaters that respect themselves aren't going to show this crap. All the hype and anticipation and puff pieces around Kyle Edward Ball. kind of reinforce the idea that I've had for a while that real art is never actually going to be as well appreciated as marketable crap. That's just not going to happen 9 times out of 10. And I'm not only mad because Hypnagogic Archive didn't get the recognition and respect it rightfully deserves. There are hundreds, tens of hundreds of thousands of analog horror web series out there probably that took real time and effort to create and weren't created for monetary incentive and aren't released on Shudder for $8 a month and aren't behind a fucking paywall and weren't funded by a fucking Kickstarter. There are probably so many amazing web series out there created by small, passionate filmmaking teams who don't demand exorbitant sums of money from their fans to produce their content, but we'll never see any of that because it's buried under a thick, thick layer of Skinamarink promotion and sludge, and I think that's honestly depressing. Whenever I make a hit piece on this, on Skinamarink or Ariel Pink or Justin Roiland or whatever hot, big media mogul figure slash buzzword is currently ramming itself into the algorithm, people are like, Nick, you're just jealous. You're just jealous of Bo Burnham or Bill Wirtz or whatever micro-celebrity is currently hot. Not really. I just recognize that we can do better as a species. We can make better shit. Like, I know we can make better shit, but we just consciously choose not to. We just follow these fake figures who are supposedly like the best. Oh my gosh, it's Jack Stauber. Oh my gosh, he's gonna make the best shit. Like, no. He makes substandard crap. You can make better shit. If you're watching this, you can probably make better shit than Jack Stauber. You can probably make better shit than Kyle Edward Ball. You don't need $10,000 on Kickstarter. Make something. Just fucking make something already. You may not ever be able to reach the level of insane prescience I've received as the Lisan al-Gaib, as Muad'Dib, as the voice from the outer world, as the quid-ass fucking Hatterack, but you can at least try. I have confidence in you there. This is what I propose. Cancel your fucking Shudder streaming subscription. Don't watch Skinamarink. It's 2 hours of boring filler. And get some fucking blue eyes and huff that melange. And then fucking go out on a rampage against the Harkonnens. And let's show them that Arrakis will always remain a desert planet, the domain of the Makers. Let's give it all we've got, huh? Memory may be dead insofar as analog horror attempted to capture it. And I do currently exist at the end of an era, that being the end of analog horror in the year 2023 AD. But that doesn't fucking matter because I'm going to keep making amazing shit, even if Kyle Edward Ball will probably just make Skinamarink and then fuck off and there won't be any future movies in his entire filmography because the entire thing is overhyped bullshit. Figures like Mr. Ball really do art and the cinematic medium in general a huge disservice. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for today regarding Skinamarink, one of the most boring, painful horror movies ever made. If you enjoyed it, be sure and like and subscribe and all that shit, or don't, and I'll be in the next one. Sayonara, suckers. Fear is the mind killer.